Lech lecha, go for your sake from your land to the land that I will show you. God's first words to Abraham. And then in verse 2, chapter 12, God tells Abraham the reward. Ve'escha l'goy gadol, I will make you into a great nation. That a promise to a husband and a wife without a child. Va'avarechecha va'agadla shemecha, and I will bless you and make your name great. That to a wanderer with few possessions. Ve'yeh bracha, and you will be a blessing. V'nivruchu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. Blessing. What does it mean to be a blessing? And why is that a reward? To answer those two questions requires exploring the deeper nature of me and we, the focus of this sermon, the blessing of we. Each of us begins life as a we. We are literally part of our mother. An infant, now born, cannot still distinguish self and the breast on which he or she suckles. And then the terrible twos. Terrible for the parents who have to hear no as the infant emerges into his or her own separateness. The teen years reveal a need for self-identity, often marked by exploring boundaries and even rebellion. Spiritual maturity unfolds only when an authentic sense of I combines and embraces a discernible we. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, in his latest book, Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times, emphasizes that morality is essential for a life of meaning, stability, and well-being, and emerges from an orientation of we. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks is the most read living rabbi. I receive his weekly Torah commentaries. He's the author of 26 books. From 1991 to 2013, he served as the chief rabbi of England, during which he was knighted as Sir Jonathan Sacks. He characterizes a healthy society as follows. When we move from the politics of me to the politics of us, we rediscover those life-transforming, counterintuitive truths that a nation is strong when it cares for the weak, that it becomes rich when it cares for the poor, that it becomes invulnerable when it cares for the vulnerable. If we care for the future of democracy, we must recover that sense of shared morality that binds us to one another in a bond of mutual compassion and care. There is no liberty without morality, no freedom without responsibility, no viable I without the sustaining me. Rabbi Sacks' critique of Western society, written, as they say, from the other side of the pond, is that the I and we are currently out of whack, with too much emphasis placed on self, self-esteem, self-realization, self-satisfaction, and self-importance. He writes that there are three essential components to a working society: economics, politics, and morality. Economics concerns accumulating wealth. Politics is about the use of power. Each is competitive. Neither in its own right is moral, and by their nature are self-serving spheres. When left to themselves, might makes right. Morality, he teaches, enables a check on selfishness. He characterizes morality as emerging from we as primal and universal. He points to the biblical story of Cain, who murders his brother Abel. Cain is punished, although he was never warned that it was forbidden to so act. And on the other side, Rabbi Sachs draws our attention to the daughter of Pharaoh, who draws a basket from the Nile with a baby boy that she calls Moses, doing so in defiance of the law. He emphasizes that knowing right and wrong, identifying how to act for the greater good, is often in conflict with the desire to do what is expedient or best for oneself. We naturally begin with Witham, reflexively asking, what is in it for me? Morality, a we orientation of knowing how to act ethically, Sachs emphasizes, is conveyed as norms through collective education. The polarity of I and we is already a teaching of Hillel, that first century Israel sage, who would say, Im ein ani li, if I am not for me, mi li, who will be for me? Uchshe'ani la'atzmi, but when I am only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? V'im lo achshav, and if not now, ematai, when? At first impression, the first two sentences are in conflict, but actually they are a polarity, like two poles with opposite charges that are naturally drawn to each other. In these times of quarantine, we are keenly aware of our need to connect with others in order to feel happy, to feel in touch with reality, to feel charged and connected. Let's examine Hillel's teaching more closely. We naturally begin with I, for the I is the vehicle of action. Like the warning on the airplane for those in the exit rows. You must take the mask for yourself in case of an emergency. And yet the I needs definition. That airline mask instruction is in the context of helping another. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Katz, the 19th century teacher, said, follow carefully now, if I am I and you are you, then I am I and you are you. But if I am I because of you, then you are not you and I am not I. The key word is because. If we depend on someone else for our own definition of I, then we lack authenticity. Rabbi Sachs points to the obsession of many in our day who constantly post on social media in order to harvest likes, to feel approval and worth. That is an I that only exists because of a you. And on the flip side, many are self-defined as victims because of how others judge and label them, a victimization that leads to humility and rage rather than a choice of empowered action. Rabbi Sachs writes that we have a cultural climate crisis of an overemphasis on I at the expense of we. As Hillel understood, if I am only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? For our lives to have meaning, we need to reach beyond ourselves. As for self-help, Sachs states, people tend to need the help of another to progress. He reminds us of the story in the Talmud, Brachot 5b, where Rabbi Yochanan becomes sick. A friend, Rabbi Hanina, comes to visit. Pray for me, Rabbi Yochanan says to his friend. But Rabbi Yochanan, you are a healer yourself. You've healed me with your prayers. Why don't you pray for yourself? To which Rabbi Yochanan replies, when a person is in a prison cell, they need somebody on the outside with the key to open the door. Pray for me. And so Rabbi Hanina prayed, and Rabbi Yochanan was healed. If I am only for myself, what am I? Rabbi Sachs marshals evidence to show that societies that are we-focused thrive, and those that are self-centered collapse. His book is so recent that he addresses the challenge of COVID, and he asks, quote, "What will be the shape of the post-COVID-19 world? That will be the defining question of the years ahead. Will we use this unparalleled moment to evaluate our priorities, or will we strive to get back as quickly as possible to business as usual? If we fail to learn from this global tragedy, we will have betrayed our nature as the animal that learns," unquote. Rabbi Sachs then contrasts the Western world's response to the two world wars of the 20th century. After World War I, Western nations became self-involved, marked by the Roaring Twenties, and by the end of that decade, the Great Financial Depression. Within 15 years of the end of the war to end all wars, we were in World War II. In contrast, at the end of World War II, he writes, there was a national consensus of too much inequality and poverty, and what emerged was national solidarity. In Britain, legislation included the National Health Service. In the U.S., the GI Bill, Social Security, a minimum wage, and disability and unemployment insurance. Sir Sachs emphasizes that the shift to the we enabled a rise of the middle class and stability for ensuing decades. Quote, "As the world recovers from the pandemic, we can work to rebuild our societies the way they were, or we can use this rare moment to enhance the structures of our togetherness, a togetherness that has been weakened by too much pursuit of self. The choice is ours, and the time is now." Big problems impact on all of us and require collective effort. The religiously conservative with a small c, Sachs, is so conservative that he will not enter into an American conservative with a big C synagogue, and is keenly apolitical. In his book, he addresses the failure of Western nations to confront the urgency of climate change as a moral failing due to an overly I focus. The future looks bleak for human life as we know it on our living planet unless we focus our collective will to limit methane and carbon dioxide emissions. We are already seeing so many lives disrupted, homes destroyed, and even deaths due to a large surge in wildfires on the West Coast and hurricanes with flooding on the East Coast, which are just some of the dire impacts of climate crisis. Rising temperatures of the air and water is COVID+, a problem identified nearly universally by experts in the field as real and increasingly dangerous, which will not have as easy a solution as a vaccine for COVID. For that matter, scientists are now warning that herd immunity for COVID requires 75 to 80% of the population have antibodies, which may take years if the public lacks confidence in the efficacy and safety of the proposed vaccines. We depend on each other for our safety, economy, and freedom. Homelessness is another example that a crisis abounding in America. A large percentage of the homeless are families where a parent has lost a job or taken ill. For those children, the opportunity to learn is severely reduced and even eliminated due to changing addresses or lack of technology, unless those children's learning needs are met. We are denying children the resources to meet their potential and endangering our collective future. How wide we define the circumference of the we varies. The Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law of the 16th century, says that we need to give tzedakah, acts of righteousness, in concentric circles, starting with family, but progressively expanding into larger and larger spheres of the world around us. Let us each pick one area of concern and try to make a small difference in this largest we. Let me return to the opening question. What does it mean to be a blessing? Let me identify two larger-than-life figures whose lives and words are a source of inspiration. Let me first honor Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Yitta Rachel, for her life of service. She enabled a cultural shift in this country and abroad, a cultural shift to better allow women and men to live lives of equal opportunity. When a high school student in recent years asked the justice how to live life, what would be her advice, she replied, "Whatever you choose to do, leave tracks. And that means don't do just for yourself. For in the end, that will not be satisfying. I think you will want to leave the world a little better for your having lived. And there is no satisfaction that a person can gain that is equal to the satisfaction that you get from knowing that you have made another's life, a community, a little bit better for your effort." As we mourn the passing and burial, let us pause to appreciate how those words reflected RBG's actual deeds. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity, as part of our Slichot presentation, to interview Father Greg Boyle. He, too, is larger than life. 32 years ago, he created and has since overseen Homeboy Industries in downtown LA, a set of 9 businesses that invite former gang members to find a job and reclaim dignity. Those businesses include a bakery, a restaurant in downtown City Hall, tattoo removal studio, a silk screening factory, employs 700 with an additional 400 trainees. It is the largest gang intervention program in the world and has provided jobs to tens of thousands of former gang members, serving as the model for over 300 such programs across the globe. As our Slichot speaker, Father Greg shared a key misconception of gang membership, saying, quote, "People are not longing to join a gang. Rather, they're fleeing the pain of severe abuse." And without a diagnosis of what leads to joining a gang, he said, we lack as a society a prescription of what and how to fix a serious problem. Unquote. That fix for homeboys begins with creating community, which he calls radical kinship. Only when we feel we belong to a group that listens and cares about us are we able to develop healthy attachments that enable a person to become a caring parent and thereby to break a cycle of abuse. His goal, he says, is, quote, to return people to their true selves, the core goodness that has always been at his or her center. The person then can circle back, acknowledging pain rather than stain, and linking their I to a healthy we. Father Greg has conducted 236 funerals for his homies. I asked him, what advice would you have for a young Father Boyle so as not to burn out? He answered paradoxically, quote, "Our true power is loving. It is not about you. When you go to the margins, do so not to make a difference for them, but for you, so that your heart will be altered by them. Do not ask how you can reach them. Instead, ask how they can reach you. If your focus is on rescuing or saving, it's about you, and you will become depleted." Unquote. I asked Father Greg to bless us as a people preparing for a new year. He did so spontaneously as follows. "Pray then that the God who loves us without measure, without regret, will bless you all to stand with the demonized, so demonizing will stop. Stand with the disposable, so the day will come when we stop throwing people away. Stand with the poor, voiceless, widow, orphan, powerless, and stranger. So we can imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle, and we make this prayer in your name." Let me circle back to us in this moment. We are blessed on this holy day of Yom Kippur to link ourselves with fellow Jews, sharing in this service, and with Jews around the world. Our prayers are largely in the plural and reach across time. We do belong. We belong to an ancient and vibrant people for whom each of us matters and is beloved. As to an impact through service, we are not necessarily as impactful as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or Father Greg Boyle. And yet, we each have the power, the ability to affect change, to better balance the I and the we, to live lives of integrity, and to more consistently act with loving kindness. This year in our small groups, we will focus on Ron Wolfson's book, The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven. If you haven't joined or agreed to host a small group, please let our office know. This is the opportunity of meaningful conversations with friends. These 7 questions, taken largely from the Talmud, begin with the question of Rava, a 3rd or 4th century Babylonian sage, Shabbat 31a, who posits the first question you will be asked, which is, were you honest in your business dealings? We will not be asked about our ritual practices or how much money we earned or how much power we wielded. Rather, Rava teaches we will be judged by our honesty and integrity in our day-to-day exchanges. For steadily earned trust is the foundation of relationship that enables a life of goodness and good-making. Morality is distilled in small acts, such as the dignity we show another person who is serving our needs, and more challenging, and this is the core of our spiritual work, and that is, how do we relate to the people closest to us? How do I treat my spouse? How do I balance my I and our we in an intimate relationship? How do we treat our children and closest friends? That is spiritual work up close for all of us, for each of us. Are we honest, faithful, and worthy of trust? Are we able to balance our own immediate seeking of pleasure with the ability of self-restraint and concern for the other, even when inconvenient? Are we able to generously listen and allow another person to feel heard and cherished? And in that regard, in this COVID time, are we calling and reaching out to family and friends to express our care? And now, the opening question. What does it mean to be a bracha, a blessing? The word bracha has the same root in Hebrew as birkayim, knees, signifying humility, of seeing ourselves as part of something grander and simultaneously reaching beyond ourselves. A second word related to bracha is brecha, a pool of water overflowing, seeing believing, the possibility of God's love overflowing into a greater whole in which we too experience that love. There is no greater reward in a life well lived than to be seen and to serve as a blessing, as a bracha. In Hillel's final phrase, Im lo achshav matai, if not now when, let us circle back, engage in teshuvah, a return to the core goodness in each of us, for which is drawn the wisdom of we. Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, let us each be a blessing. As an enduring reward of a life of goodness, let us honor the I, but know that it is but the starting point. Let us reach beyond ourselves toward the we, doing so with discipline and moral integrity. And may we each be a vessel of love, conveying that love selflessly to all those around us. May we do so through small acts of loving kindness, trustworthiness, and justice, thereby living morally. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, if not now, when? And together, let us say, Amen.